Close your eyes now, and let yourself drift backward through time. Past yesterday, past last year, past all the centuries you can name, past the ancient temples crumbling in moonlight, past the very first words ever spoken, and further still, into the silence before silence had a name. Imagine, if you will, a darkness so complete that it wasn't darkness at all, because there was nothing yet to contrast it with. No stars, no earth, no sky to hold them, just potential, just waiting. The Greeks called this chaos, but not chaos as we know it today, not disorder or confusion. Something quieter, something patient, an empty space, vast and still, like the pause between breaths, or the moment before falling asleep. What does your mind show you when you picture this void? Perhaps it's like standing in a room with no walls, or floating in water so dark and warm you can't tell where your body ends and the universe begins. There's no hurry here, no urgency, just the gentle, eternal present before time learned to move forward. And in this quiet, something stirred. Not with violence, not with sound, but with the softest whisper of becoming. The first gods were not gods as we imagined them, not sitting on thrones or hurling lightning. They were forces, feelings, the slow breath of existence learning to exist. Gaia emerged, the earth not yet solid, not yet green with life, but present. A consciousness of groundedness, a foundation, of the promise that something could rest upon something else. Picture her now, as you drift, not as a woman or a mountain, but as the very concept of place, of home, of beneath. And Tartarus, the deep beneath the beneath, the shadows under the world, not evil, but necessary. The place where things could fall, where depth had meaning, a gentle abyss, patient and dark, like the space behind your closed eyelids when you're almost asleep. Eros appeared too, not the cherub with arrows, but something older. The pull between things. The reason anything would ever want to join with anything else. The soft magnetism of existence drawing closer to itself. The way your body settles deeper into your bed as you relax. The way consciousness drifts toward dreams. And from these first quiet stirrings, the world began its long, slow dreaming into being. Take a breath now, let it out slowly, and let us drift together into the first age of stories, into the time when gods were young and the world was learning its own shape. Part 1. The primordials, the first dreaming. In the beginning, there was time to wait, and waiting was all there was. From Gaia, the earth, came Uranus, the sky. Not born in pain or effort, but simply arising, as natural as mist forming over a quiet lake at dawn. Uranus spread himself above Gaia, vast and starlit and eternal, and together they held the world between them like a secret. The first embrace, the first partnership, sky meeting earth in the gentlest of unions. And from this union came children, many children, beings of such ancient power that their names alone feel heavy on the tongue. But we will speak them softly here, in this quiet space, as if naming distant constellations on a clear, calm night. First came the Titans, 12 of them, 6 brothers, 6 sisters, each one a force of nature given slow, deliberate form. There was Oceanus, the endless river that circled the world, not rushing or turbulent, but flowing with the patience of centuries. Picture water moving so slowly you could rest your hand in it and feel time itself passing through your fingers. There was Ceus, intellect in its most distant, cosmic form, the axis upon which the heavens turned a consciousness, so vast it thought in seasons rather than seconds. Crius, the cold precision of constellations, the measurement of heaven. Hyperion, the first glimmer of light, not yet the sun, but the promise of illumination, the idea that someday there might be morning. Iapetus, the pillar of mortality, the understanding that things might end, gently, naturally, returning to the quiet from which they came. And Kronos, youngest of the brothers, whom we will meet again in deeper ways, the one who learned that time could be more than patient, that it could deviate, could act. The sisters, too, emerged like slow notes in an ancient song. Thea, the shimmer of precious things, gold-catching moonlight, the gleam on water at dusk. Rhea, the flow of ease, of generation, of continuity, the way one day becomes the next without effort. Themis, natural law, not written or enforced, but simply true, the way stones fall downward, the way rivers find the sea. Mnemosyne, memory itself, the first being who could look backward, who could hold what had been and keep it safe in the darkness behind thought. Phoebe, the bright intelligence of the moon, the light that guides without harsh revelation, the glow that helps you see in dreams. And Tethys, the nurse of waters, the nourishing deep, the promise that life, when it came, would have something to drink. Can you picture them? Not as people, but as presences, as the feeling of standing beneath stars, of touching ancient stone, of knowing something vast exists just beyond your understanding. These titans dwelled in the early world, and for a time, such a long, peaceful time, they simply were. They moved through the growing creation like slow music. They married each other, these siblings, in the way that elements combine. And from them came more beings, gods of rivers and streams, spirits of meadows and mountains, the Oceanids, 3,000 daughters of water, each one a spring or brook or hidden pool in a forest where deer come to drink at twilight. Auranas looked upon his children and felt something. Not love, perhaps, not as we know it, but presence, awareness. These beings existed, and existence was still new enough to be strange. But there were other children too. From Gaia and Auranas came beings that did not fit the gentle pattern. Beings whose very existence seemed too powerful, too primal, too close to the raw force of creation itself. The Cyclopes, 3 of them, each with one great eye in the center of the forehead, makers of thunder, of lightning, of the deep rumble of the earth when it stirs in sleep. They were not monsters, not yet, simply beings of craft and power, patient and slow in their ancient forges. And the Centimanes, 3 brothers, each with 100 hands and 50 heads. Imagine that, if you can, or let the image drift past you like a strange dream symbol, beings of overwhelming strength, of multitude made flesh, of the idea that some forces in nature cannot be singular, cannot be simple. Auranas looked upon these younger children and felt something else now. Something darker. Not quite fear, but discomfort. These beings were too much. Too strong. Too strange. They disrupted the quiet order he preferred. And so, in the way that older powers sometimes do when confronted with what they cannot understand, he hid them. One by one, Auranas took the Cyclopes and the Centimanes and pushed them down into Tartarus, that deep place beneath the world, that shadow realm we met at the very beginning. He pressed them into the darkness and sealed them there, not with locks or chains, but simply by covering them, by being the sky above the earth, vast and immovable. Gaia felt this. She felt her children trapped inside her, in the deep places, unable to emerge. And slowly, over ages, something like sorrow grew in her. Or perhaps anger. Or perhaps simply the recognition that this could not stand. That hiding what is real does not make it less real, only buried. The world turned. Seasons passed, though seasons were not yet what they would become. The Titans grew and dreamed and moved through their slow existence. And deep within the earth, Gaia began to plan. She did not rush. There was no need to rush. Time, after all, was still learning its own nature. But she remembered. And in the remembering, a story began to take new shape. Take a moment now, let your breathing slow, feel the weight of your body against the surface beneath you. And know that we are still in the early world, where changes happen slowly like mountains rising or seas deepening. And that there is time, yet so much time, for the story to unfold. How would it feel, do you think, to be the earth itself? To hold so many beings inside yourself, to be the foundation for all things, and to know that some of what you carry is being kept in darkness. Rest with that question, and when you're ready, let us drift forward into the first great change of the cosmos. Part 2, the overthrow, when children rose against the sky. Gaia called her children to her, the Titans, the eldest beings who walked upon her surface and knew her as mother. She called them quietly, in the way the earth speaks to those who listen, through stone and root, through the slow pulse of deep places. And she spoke to them of Auranas, of the sky who pressed down upon her without pause, without rest, of the children trapped in darkness, of the way things were, and the way things might be different. One of you, she said, in her voice like distant thunder, could free them. One of you could change what is. The Titans stood silent. For a long moment none spoke. To act against Auranas, against the sky itself, was to act against the very structure of existence as they knew it. It was to say that what had always been did not have to continue forever. But then Kronos, the youngest, stepped forward. We should pause here and consider Kronos, not as villain or hero, but simply as what he was. A Titan, a being of time and harvest and the natural cycles. He was not evil, not yet. He was simply willing to act, willing to be the one who brought change, even if change meant violence. Gaia gave him a weapon, a sickle, curved and sharp, made from adamant, from the hardest substance in the infant cosmos. And then she instructed him where to hide, where to wait, and what to do when Auranas came down once more to cover her, to press close in that eternal, suffocating embrace. Picture now a night sky, Imagine yourself lying on your back, looking up at stars, feeling the vastness above you. That is what the world felt like then, every moment. Sky pressed to earth, unending. And on one particular night, if we can call it night when day and night were not yet separated, Uranus came down as always, and Kronos waited in his hidden place, waited with the patience of ages. And then, at the perfect moment, he struck. The sickle flashed. Uranus cried out, not in words, for the Titans did not yet speak as we speak, but in the language of thunder and wind suddenly wounded. And Kronos, in one terrible, necessary motion, separated his father from his mother, severed sky from earth, and changed the cosmos forever. Uranus pulled away, screaming, retreating upward into the heights where he would remain, distant now, no longer pressing down, no longer trapping what lay below. And as he withdrew, drops of his blood fell to the earth, and from these drops came new beings. The Furies were born from this violence, three sisters of vengeance, of justice, of the understanding that some acts must be answered. They did not hate Kronos. They simply existed now, as consequences exist, as the recognition that every action echoes forward through time. The giants too emerged from these scattered drops, beings of earth and strength, who would have their own role to play in later ages. And from the foam where other parts of Uranus fell into the sea, far from here, near the island of Cyprus, something else began to form. But that birth would take time, and we will meet her later, when she rises fully formed, perfect and beautiful and terrible, from the waves. Kronos stood holding the bloody sickle, and the world knew its first change of power. Gaia's trapped children, the Cyclopes and the Cenomans, did Kronos free them? Not immediately. Not yet. There would be time for that, he thought. First, there was a cosmos to order, a rule to establish. And so began the Age of the Titans, the Golden Age, as later poets would call it, though whether it was truly golden depends on who tells the story. Kronos took his sister Rhea as his wife, as Sky had taken Earth, and together they became the ruling powers of the world. The other Titans took their places in the cosmic order. Oceanus continued his endless flowing around the world's rim. Hyperion married Thea, and from them would come the sun, the moon, and the dawn. Ceus married Phoebe, and from them would come wisdom's lineage. The world grew more defined, more specific. The vague dreaming of the primordial age gave way to something more structured, more knowable. Valleys formed, mountains rose, the sea found its boundaries, rivers carved their paths and learned their names. And for a time, a long, long time, there was peace of a sort, the kind of peace that comes from stability, from knowing what will happen next. Kronos ruled from his place of power, and the seasons turned in their cycles, and the world was young and green and full of potential. But there was something Kronos knew, a whisper, a prophecy that Gaia herself had spoken, or perhaps that he had simply understood in the moment of his father's overthrow, that as he had risen against his own father, so too would his children rise against him, that this pattern once begun would continue. That time, his very domain, would not protect him from time's own hunger. And so, when Rhea began to bear children, when the new generation of gods began to emerge, Kronos made a choice. He would not let the prophecy come true. He would not be overthrown. He would do what he must to remain in power. And what he did, we will speak of now, softly, as we move into the story of the Olympians' hidden birth. But first, take a breath. Let yourself settle deeper into rest. Know that you are safe here, in this story, in this quiet telling. The violence of myths happened long ago, in the dreaming time, and we speak of it now only to understand how the world came to be the way it is, how change requires courage, how even gods must face what they fear most. How do you imagine Kronos felt, knowing that his own actions had set a pattern in motion, that in severing sky from earth, he had also severed the certainty that power, once claimed, could be held forever? Rest with this, and when you're ready, let us meet the hidden children who would become the gods of Olympus. Part 3. The Hidden Children, Birth of the Olympians. Rhea felt the stirring of life within her, the first child, and she felt joy, as any mother might. But she also felt dread, for she knew her husband's fear, and she suspected what he might do. The child was born, a daughter, beautiful and strong even as an infant, with eyes that held the deep knowing of harvest and growth. Demeter, she would be called, though she did not yet have her name. The goddess who would teach humanity to tend the earth, to plant and reap, to transform seed into bread. But Rhea barely had time to hold her before Kronos came, demanding to see the child. And then, in a moment so terrible it seems impossible, so nightmarish it feels unreal, Kronos took his daughter and swallowed her whole. Not chewing, not destroying, simply swallowing, taking her into himself, keeping her in the darkness of his own body where she could not grow, could not challenge him, could not fulfill any prophecy. Rhea screamed. But what could she do? Kronos was lord of the Titans, king of the cosmos. And the deed was done. This happened again. Another child, Hestia, the firstborn, gentle and warm, who would one day be the goddess of the hearth of home, of the fire that brings families together. Swallowed. Another child, Hera, proud and powerful even as an infant, with a presence that commanded attention. Swallowed. Another, Hades, strange and solemn, with eyes like deep caverns. Swallowed. Another, Poseidon, wild and fierce, crying with a voice like storm waves. Swallowed. 5 children, 5 daughters and sons, 5 gods who would never see the sun, never walk the earth, never know anything but the warm, dark interior of their father's belly, where they remained immortal and unchanging, neither growing nor dying, simply waiting. Rhea wept. She wept as only mothers can weep when their children are taken from them. And when she felt the 6th child beginning to form within her, she knew she could not let this happen again. She could not stand to feel another infant disappear down her husband's throat. She could not bear another loss. And so, she did what her mother had done. She planned. She sought help. She went to Gaia, to the earth itself, and asked for counsel. Gaia remembered. She remembered what it felt like to have children trapped in darkness. She remembered how Kronos had freed her from Uranus's oppression. And she remembered that Kronos had never, in turn, freed the Cyclopes and Cenomanes from their prison in Tartarus. He had promised, perhaps, but he had not acted. He had become too comfortable in power. Let this child be born in secret, Gaia said, her voice like stones settling. And I will help you hide him. The 6th child grew. And when the time came for birth, Rhea did not stay in Kronos' halls. She traveled far across the sea to the island of Crete, to a cave on Mount Ida, hidden and holy, where the sound of waves and wind would cover any cries. And there, in darkness and in secret, the god who would change everything was born, Zeus. He emerged squalling and fierce, with fists clenched and eyes bright with stormlight. Even as an infant, power radiated from him. The cave itself seemed to hum with his presence. Rhea held him, this one precious child she could keep, this one hope, and then she prepared to return to her husband. But she could not return empty-handed. Kronos would demand to see the child, would demand to swallow it. So she took a large stone, roughly the size and weight of a swaddled infant, and she wrapped it in blankets, soft and warm. And she carried this false child back to Kronos' domain. Another son, she said, her voice flat with grief that was not entirely feigned. And she held out the bundle. Kronos barely looked. He had done this 5 times before. It was routine now. He took the bundle, opened his mouth, that vast, divine mouth, and swallowed the stone in one quick motion. He did not notice the difference, did not pause to consider that the weight was wrong, that the shape was too hard. He simply swallowed and went on with his rule, believing himself safe from prophecy. And far away on Crete, the infant Zeus began to grow. He was raised in secret, this hidden king. The nymphs of the island cared for him. A goat named Amalthea nursed him, and he would later honor her by placing her image among the stars. The Cuorides, warrior spirits of the mountain, danced and clashed their spears whenever the baby cried, making noise to cover his voice so that Kronos, if he was listening, would hear nothing suspicious. Zeus grew quickly as gods do, ate honey and drank divine milk, played in the shadows of the cave, and learned the shape of his own power. Lightning crackled at his fingertips, even in childhood. Thunder rumbled in his laugh. And as he grew, the nymphs told him stories, told him of his siblings, trapped in their father's belly, told him of the Titan's rule, told him of the prophecy that one day he would challenge Kronos and win. Zeus listened, and he began to plan. When he was grown, or grown enough, he left Crete. He traveled in secret to the Titan Metis, the daughter of Oceanus, goddess of cunning and wise counsel. She lived by the world river, and she knew much, for water sees many things as it flows. "Help me," Zeus said. "Help me free my siblings. Help me fulfill what must be fulfilled." Metis considered. She saw in this young god the same potential for tyranny that had marked Kronos. But she also saw something else, something that might, just might, be different. A willingness to listen. A capacity for growth. "There is a mixture I can make," she said slowly. "A potion. If your father drinks it, it will make him regurgitate what he has swallowed." And so, she prepared the draft. Mixed it with wine and honey, made it sweet, made it seem like a gift. and Zeus, with all the courage of youth and destiny, brought it to his father's halls. The meeting between father and son was strange. Kronos looked at this young titan, for he did not yet recognize Zeus as his child, and saw only another minor deity, come perhaps to pay tribute. "I bring wine," Zeus said, "from distant lands, a toast to your eternal rule." Kronos, who had grown comfortable in his power, who feasted often and feared little, accepted the cup. He drank, and immediately, terribly, the potion began its work. Kronos doubled over, his body convulsed, and from his mouth came first the stone, that wrapped stone, now revealed for what it was, which fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Then came the gods. One by one, in reverse order of their swallowing, they emerged. First Poseidon, wild-eyed and disoriented, stumbling forward, lungs full of air for the first time in years. Then Hades, quiet and strange, adjusting slowly to light. Then Hera, immediately regal, immediately aware. Then Demeter and Hestia, holding each other, blinking in wonder at the world they'd never seen. 5 Olympians, born years ago but emerging now, fully grown, immortal and unchanged by their imprisonment, but marked by it nonetheless. They had been conscious in that darkness, had waited, had known only each other's presence in the warm void of their father's belly. And now they stood free, looking at the young god who had freed them, their brother Zeus, and understanding that everything was about to change. Kronos roared. His rage shook the foundations of the cosmos. He understood now, understood the deception, understood that the prophecy was unfolding exactly as foretold. "You," he said, staring at Zeus with eyes full of fury and fear. "You." "Yes," Zeus said, and lightning began to gather in his hands. "Me." And behind him, his 5 siblings began to gather their own power. Poseidon's eyes darkened with the green of deep oceans. Hades drew shadows around himself like a cloak. Hera's presence became commanding, undeniable. Demeter's fingers sparked with the promise of growth and decay. Hestia, alone, remained still. But her stillness was the stillness of a flame that does not waver, that burns true and constant. "We will not live in darkness anymore," Zeus said. "Neither us, nor the others you've imprisoned. The Cyclopes, the Centimanes, all of you will be freed. And you," he looked at Kronos, and his young face was hard, "you will learn what it means to be overthrown, as you overthrew your own father." Kronos called for his siblings, the other titans, called them to war. And they came, Oceanus flowing in like a tidal wave, Hyperion blazing with ancient light, Iapetus with his crushing strength, Ceus with his cold intelligence. The sisters too, though some would hesitate, would wonder if this battle needed to be fought. The cosmos held its breath. And then, in a moment that would echo through all of history, the first great war of the gods began. But we will not rush into that war just yet. First, let us pause. Let us breathe. Let us feel the weight of what has happened. 6 children, freed from impossible imprisonment. A prophecy coming true despite all efforts to prevent it. And a father and son, facing each other across the great divide of generational change. How do you imagine Zeus felt in that moment? Afraid? Triumphant? Certain of his cause? Or filled with doubt about what war would bring? And Kronos, do you think he remembered, in that instant, what it felt like to raise a sickle against his own father? Do you think he saw the pattern repeating? Rest here for a moment. Let these questions drift through your mind like clouds across a night sky. There is no hurry. The war is coming, yes, but wars, like storms, take time to gather. And we have all the time in the world. When you're ready, when your breathing has settled and your body has relaxed a little deeper into rest, we'll continue into the Titanomachy, the war that shaped the heavens. But for now, just rest. Just breathe. Just be here, in the quiet before the storm. Part 4, the Titanomachy, the war of old gods and new. Picture, if you can, a war that lasted 10 years, but 10 years when time itself was still young and uncertain. 10 years that might have been 10,000 or 10 heartbeats, depending on where you stood in the cosmos. The ancient Greeks knew this war as the Titanomachy, the Titan War, and it was the first true conflict of divine powers. On one side stood the Titans, the old order, led by Kronos. They were vast, ancient, elemental. They had ruled since the world learned structure. They were not evil, simply established, comfortable, unwilling to yield what they had known for so long. Oceanus with his worldwide river, Hyperion bringing light, Ceus with his celestial axis, Themis, even goddess of natural law, though she would eventually see reason and change sides. And others too, cousins and children of the original 12. a host of divine beings who thought the world should remain as it had been. On the other side stood the Olympians, Zeus and his 5 siblings, still learning their powers, still understanding what they could be. They were young, fierce, full of the righteous anger of those who had been wronged. They gathered allies where they could. Some titans joined them, Themis, eventually, who saw that justice required change. Prometheus and Epimetheus, sons of Iapetus, who looked at their young cousins and saw something worth supporting. But even with these allies, the Olympians were outnumbered, outpowered, outmatched. The war was fought on many levels. On the earth, where mountains shook and valleys split. In the sky, where lightning clashed with ancient starlight. In the depths of the sea, where Poseidon learned to command the waves and Oceanus resisted him. 2 water gods in opposition, one ancient and one new. For 10 years, neither side could gain advantage. The cosmos itself groaned under the strain. Forests burned. Rivers ran backward. The seasons forgot their order. Day and night mixed together in confusion, unable to tell which was which when Hyperion and Zeus battled in the upper air. Zeus fought with lightning, with thunder, with all the storm fury he could muster. But Kronos had ruled for ages. He was stronger, more experienced, more certain in his power. Again and again, Zeus was thrown back. Again and again, he rose to fight once more. Poseidon crashed tsunami against Oceanus' steady flow, and the waters churned and roared, and could not decide who would master them. Hades fought in the shadows, bringing darkness to battlefield after battlefield, but the Titans had known darkness long before him. Hera commanded, organized, held the Olympian forces together with her will. Demeter caused the earth to rise up, to tangle the Titans in roots and vines. But the earth remembered that it was made by Gaia, and Gaia did not fight on either side. She simply watched, ancient and patient. Hestia did not fight at all. She remained at the Olympians' hearth, tending the fire that would not go out, the warm center that gave them a place to return to. Sometimes the most important role in a war is simply to keep the idea of home alive. 10 years. 10 years of stalemate. 10 years of destruction. And then Zeus remembered what Kronos had forgotten. He remembered the Cyclopes, still imprisoned in Tartarus. He remembered the Centimanes, the 100-handed ones, still trapped in the deep dark beneath the world. His father had never freed them, despite his mother's wishes, despite his own promises when he overthrew Uranus. But Zeus was willing to do what Kronos had not. With Poseidon and Hades beside him, Zeus journeyed down through the layers of the world, past the surface, past the regions of root and stone, past the caverns where echoes lived, all the way down to Tartarus itself, that abyss we met at the very beginning, that primordial depth. There in the darkness, they found the guards Kronos had set, a great dragon, perhaps, or spirits of binding, and they fought past them. And there, in the deepest prison, they found the Cyclopes, those one-eyed smiths, and the Centimanes, those many-handed giants. "Will you help us?" Zeus asked. "Will you fight beside us against the one who kept you here?" The Cyclopes looked at each other with their single, huge eyes. They had waited so long, had dreamed of sky and sunlight, had remembered their craft, the joy of making things, the satisfaction of the forge. "We will help you," they said. "But first, let us make you gifts, weapons worthy of new gods." And they worked their craft, there in Tartarus, using materials from the deep places. They forged for Zeus a weapon that could channel all his storm nature into a single bolt, the master bolt, the lightning that could pierce any defense. They forged for Poseidon a trident, 3-pronged and perfect, that could command the earth to quake and the seas to obey. They forged for Hades a helmet of invisibility, the helm of darkness, that would let him move unseen through any realm. 3 weapons, 3 brothers, 3 divine gifts that would tip the balance of a war. The Centimanes needed no such gifts. They were weapons themselves. Each one had 50 heads, 100 arms, and the strength to throw mountains. They had waited in darkness, so long that their rage had become a kind of terrible patience. "We will fight," they said simply. "Show us where." And so the freed prisoners rose from Tartarus, up into the world, and when they joined the battlefield, everything changed. The Cyclopes brought storms like the world had never seen. Lightning rained from the heavens in sheets, not single bolts. Thunder rolled continuously, a drumbeat of divine anger. The Titans, powerful as they were, had never faced weapons forged specifically to challenge them. The Centimanes threw boulders by the hundreds. With 100 hands, they could hurl 100 rocks in the time it took to breathe. They did not tire. They did not slow. They simply fought with the accumulated rage of ages of imprisonment. The tide of war shifted. Kronos saw his forces falling back, saw the Olympians pressing forward, and he knew that the prophecy was fulfilling itself, knew that his time was ending. But he did not yield. He fought on, terrible and desperate, the way cornered things fight when they have nothing left to lose. The final battle, if we can call any single moment in a 10-year war the final battle, took place on the slopes of Mount Othrys, the Titan's stronghold. Zeus and Kronos met in single combat, father and son, old power and new. Lightning cracked. Time itself seemed to waver. The ground split beneath them. But Zeus had his gift weapon now, had his master bolt, had his brothers beside him and his siblings behind him, and the Cyclopes raining lightning from above, and the Centimanes hurling the mountain itself at the Titan forces. One last strike. One terrible, brilliant, impossible bolt of lightning, thrown with all the force of change, all the necessity of the new generation rising. And Kronos fell. Not dead, gods do not die so easily, but defeated, broken, cast down from his throne, from his power, from his age-long certainty. The other Titans who had fought beside him fell too, or surrendered, or fled. Oceanus retreated to his world river, and did not emerge again for centuries. Hyperion's light was dimmed. Ceus was bound. Iapetus was cast down to Tartarus, that same prison where he had helped keep the Cyclopes and Centimanes confined. And Kronos himself, Kronos, who had swallowed his children, who had overthrown his father, who had ruled the Golden Age, was chained in the darkest depths of Tartarus, bound with the unbreakable chains the Cyclopes forged, guarded by the Centimanes he had imprisoned. There he remains, in some tellings even now, sleeping in the deep places, dreaming, perhaps, of the time when he ruled, or perhaps simply existing in the timeless dark, beyond time's own reach at last. The war was over. The cosmos was broken and needed rebuilding. And the Olympians stood victorious, exhausted, looking at a world that was theirs now to shape. Take a breath. Feel the weight of that victory. Feel the cost of it. 10 years of war, the world itself damaged, the old order shattered. When you win through violence, even necessary violence, something is always broken that can never be quite the same again. But the Olympians were young, and the young believe they can build better than what came before. Let yourself rest here for a moment, in this space between the old world and the new, between what was and what will be. Your breathing is slow now, steady, and the story continues gently forward, like a river finding its course after a storm. Part 5, The Division of the Cosmos, 3 brothers, 3 realms. After the war, the 3 brothers stood together, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, and looked at what they had won. A broken cosmos. A world without clear rule. Titans imprisoned or scattered. Their sisters waiting to understand what would come next. We must divide it, Zeus said. The world is too vast for one to rule alone. This was wisdom, perhaps. Or perhaps it was simply practicality. The 3 brothers were too strong, too proud, too powerful to all occupy the same space without conflict. They had fought together, yes, but now, in victory, each one's nature asserted itself more clearly. They drew lots, these 3 gods, in the ancient way. 3 realms. 3 fates. Let chance decide, they thought, and then let there be no resentment afterward. Zeus drew the sky, the heavens, the upper air where storms gathered and lightning lived. This felt right to him. He had always been a creature of thunder and high places. From the peaks of mountains he would rule. From Olympus itself, that great mountain in Thessaly that would become the home of the gods. The sky suited him, vast and visible, where all could see his power and know that he commanded from above. Poseidon drew the sea. All the waters of the world, oceans, rivers, springs, the deep blue stretches that covered more of the earth than land did. At first, he was uncertain. He had fought in the air, with lightning and storm. But when he descended to the waters, when he felt the waves respond to his presence, when he understood the power that moved in tides and currents and the crushing depths of ocean trenches, he knew this realm was his in ways he hadn't imagined. The sea was vast as the sky and darker, more secret, full of creatures and mysteries Zeus would never see. Poseidon smiled, there in the green-blue depths, and made his home in a palace of coral and pearl and living stone. Hades drew the underworld, the land beneath the land, the realm of the dead, which was growing more populous now as the first humans, we will meet them soon, began to live and die upon the earth. At first, this seemed the worst lot, the darkest realm, the loneliest kingdom. Zeus had the glory of the sky, Poseidon had the beauty of the sea, and Hades had shadows, death, the silent places where souls went when their bodies failed. But Hades did not complain. He looked at his realm and saw what others might not see, that death was not less important than life, that every living thing would come to him eventually, that his kingdom would grow while his brothers' kingdoms would remain the same size. He saw the wealth beneath the earth, gold and silver and gems forming slowly in the patient darkness. He saw the necessity of his role, the way he would be feared and needed in equal measure. And besides, Hades had always been comfortable in darkness, had spent his youth in the dark belly of Kronos, had learned patience there, had learned to wait, to think, to exist in quiet spaces. "I will take it," he said simply, and he descended into the earth and did not return to the surface for a long, long time. The earth itself, Gaia, the broad land where mortals would walk and plants would grow and cities would rise, was declared common ground. No single god would rule it. It would be the meeting place, the shared space, the stage where all their stories would play out. And so the cosmos was divided. Sky, sea, and underworld. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Three brothers who had fought together and now would rule separately, each in his own domain, each sovereign in his realm. The sisters took their places too. Hera, powerful and proud, became Zeus's wife and queen. She did not do this out of love, not at first, though love would come, complicated and difficult as it would be. She did it because she understood power, understood that to be queen of the gods meant to stand beside the king of the gods. She would rule Olympus with him, would oversee marriages and families, would protect the bonds that held society together. And she would expect loyalty in return, expect it absolutely, and when she did not receive it, her anger would be terrible to behold. Demeter chose the earth itself as her domain, not the underworld beneath or the sky above, but the rich soil, the growing things, the cycle of planting and harvest. She taught humanity agriculture, showed them how to turn wild grass into wheat, how to grind grain into flour, how to transform the raw materials of the earth into sustenance. She was gentle in this, patient, like a farmer must be patient with seasons. But she would learn in time that gentleness has its limits when what you love is taken from you. Hestia took the smallest throne, or rather, she took no throne at all. She remained in the center of Olympus, tending the hearth, keeping the sacred fire burning. She never left, never sought adventure or romance or conflict, simply existed as the warm center, the home fire, the place you return to. She was the least dramatic of the Olympians, and perhaps, in her own way, the most essential. For what is a home without a hearth? What is power without a center? The Olympians established their order, built their palaces on Mount Olympus, that great peak that touched the clouds. Zeus took the highest throne, carved from marble and adorned with eagles. Hera sat beside him, regal and watchful. The others arranged themselves according to their natures and roles. And slowly, gradually, other gods joined them on the mountain. Children who had not yet been born. Powers that needed to be expressed. Divine beings who would fill the remaining thrones until Olympus held 12 great gods, the Dodecatheon, the ruling council of the divine. But who were these other gods? And how did they come to be? Let us meet them now, one by one, in the quiet way we've been moving through this story. Not rushing, not overwhelming, just introducing them like meeting distant relatives you've heard about but never quite understood. Picture Olympus now, if you will. A great mountain, its peak lost in clouds. Palaces of white stone and gold. Gardens where flowers bloom eternally. Springs of clear water. The air thin and bright and humming with divine presence. And in these palaces, these spaces between earth and sky, the gods gathered to begin their eternal reign. How would it feel, do you think, to stand on that mountain? To look down at the world spread below you? The green earth, the blue sea, the cities just beginning to form? Would you feel powerful? Responsible? Lonely perhaps, so high above everything? Rest with that image. Feel the height, the thin air, the sense of being above, always above, looking down. And when you're ready, when your body has settled a little deeper into sleep, we'll meet the other Olympians, the younger generation, the gods who completed the divine family. Part 6, the Olympian Council, Gods of the New Order. What do you imagine Mount Olympus would look like at night? Drop it in the comment section as we continue. From Zeus came children, many children, as he would father many more throughout the ages. But some of his children became the great gods of Olympus, taking their places beside their father in the halls of divine power. First came Athena, though her birth was strange, as births of gods often were. Zeus had taken as his first wife the Titan Metis. Remember her? The one who gave him the potion to free his siblings. Metis, goddess of wisdom and cunning. who knew more than perhaps even Zeus understood. But Zeus learned of a prophecy, another prophecy. Always there are prophecies in these stories, that Métis would bear 2 children. First a daughter, then a son. And the son would overthrow Zeus, just as Zeus had overthrown Kronos, just as Kronos had overthrown Uranus. The pattern continuing, endlessly repeating. Zeus, who had fought so hard to break his father's rule, was not willing to be broken in turn. And so he did what his father had done, though perhaps he told himself it was different, necessary, justified. He swallowed Métis whole, while she was pregnant with their first child. And for a time nothing happened. Métis existed somewhere inside Zeus, and he went on with his rule, believing he had prevented the prophecy. But then one day, Zeus developed a terrible headache, a pounding in his skull that even a god could not ignore. It grew worse and worse, until finally he called for help. Hephaestus, the smith god, whom we'll meet properly soon, came with his tools. "Split my head open," Zeus commanded, desperate with pain. Hephaestus, who was used to impossible requests from the gods, raised his axe and brought it down on Zeus's skull. And from the wound sprang Athena, fully grown, fully armored, her gray eyes gleaming with intelligence, her spear ready, her voice strong and clear. She emerged not as an infant, but as a complete goddess, wise and terrible and beautiful, born from her father's head where wisdom itself resided. She was born of thought, not of body, born of intellect, not of passion, and she would become the goddess of wisdom, of strategy, of civilized warfare, of craft and skill, and all the arts that require thinking before acting. She was her mother's daughter. Métis lived on in her, even if Métis herself remained swallowed and silent inside Zeus. Athena took her place on Olympus immediately, became one of her father's most trusted counselors. Never married, never bore children of her own, but mentored many heroes, guided many warriors, protected many cities. Athens, greatest of Greek cities, would be named for her. The owl became her symbol, watchful, wise, seeing in darkness. Then came Apollo and Artemis, the divine twins, born to the Titan Leto in circumstances both beautiful and painful. Leto wandered the earth in labor, desperate to find a place to give birth. But Hera, remember Hera, Zeus's wife, who expected loyalty and did not forgive when Zeus strayed, was jealous. She had decreed that Leto could not give birth on any solid land. Every island, every shore turned the suffering goddess away, afraid of Hera's anger. Finally, Leto came to Delos, a floating island, a place that was not quite fixed, not quite solid ground. And there, under a palm tree, she gave birth to 2 divine children. First came Artemis, the daughter, swift and fierce even as a newborn. And immediately, in the way of myths where time bends strangely, Artemis helped her mother give birth to her twin brother, Apollo, who came 9 days later in some tellings, or 9 months, or 9 heartbeats, depending on who tells the story. Apollo emerged bright and beautiful, radiating light even before the sun became his domain. He was the god of music, of poetry, of prophecy, of healing, of the civilized arts. His lyre could soothe even the angriest gods. His oracles could see what was coming, though they spoke always in riddles, in words that bent truth into shapes that only revealed themselves when it was too late to change what they foretold. He was Golden Apollo, far-shooting Apollo, who loved beauty and reason and the ordered patterns of music and verse. He would have many loves, many tragedies, many temples built in his name. Delphi, most sacred of oracle sites, was his. The light of day was his, though he was not quite the sun itself. That role was more complicated, as we'll see. Artemis, his sister, took the opposite path. She asked Zeus for eternal virginity, for freedom from marriage, for wild places and wild things. She became the goddess of the hunt, of forests, of the moon's cold light. She ran with a pack of nymphs, all sworn to remain unmarried, all free and fierce and untamable. Deer were sacred to her. Bears too. She protected young girls, guided them through the dangerous transition to womanhood, and punished men who violated women with terrible, creative vengeance. She was the wildness that resists civilization, the part of nature that will not be tamed or domesticated or made safe. And she was perfectly content in this role, asking nothing from Olympus but the freedom to remain in the forests and mountains she loved. The twins took their places among the gods, Apollo with his lyre and his bright presence, Artemis with her bow and her silver arrows, each one beloved of Zeus, each one powerful in their own distinct way. From Zeus and Hera came Ares, the god of war. Not strategy like Athena, raw war, battle lust, the bloodshed and chaos of combat. He was fierce and violent and beautiful in a terrible way, all rippling muscles and shining armor, and the kind of anger that doesn't think, just acts. The other gods did not love Ares. Even his father often found him too brutal, too thoughtless. Even his mother, proud as she was, could not quite approve of what her son represented. But Ares had his role, because for all that we might wish otherwise, war is part of human nature. Conflict is real, and someone had to be the god who represented it in its rawest form. Ares took lovers, many lovers, for he was beautiful despite his violence. But he never quite found his place among the careful politics of Olympus. He was more comfortable on battlefields, among warriors who understood the simplicity of combat. From Zeus and Hera also came Hephaestus, though his story is more complicated, more painful than most. In some tellings, Hera bore Hephaestus alone, without Zeus, in a fit of anger, wanting to prove she could create life without her husband, just as Zeus had done when Athena sprang from his head. In other tellings, both parents created him together, but all the tellings agree on what happened next. Hephaestus was born lame, deformed in some way, perhaps his legs twisted, perhaps his back bent, perhaps simply not perfect in the way the other gods were perfect. And when Hera saw him, she was ashamed, angry, disappointed that her child was not flawless. And she threw him from Olympus. A mother threw her infant son from the mountain of the gods, and he fell. Fell for a day and a night, tumbling through the air, until he crashed into the sea near the island of Lemnos. He should have died, perhaps. But gods do not die so easily, and Hephaestus was found by sea nymphs, Thetis and Eurynomy, who took pity on this broken divine child. They raised him in an underwater grotto, taught him gentleness, showed him love when his own mother had shown him only rejection. And there, in his pain and isolation, Hephaestus discovered his gift. He began to make things, beautiful things, clever things. He learned metalwork, learned to shape bronze and gold and silver into objects of impossible craftsmanship. He forged a grotto full of wonders, gifts for his foster mothers, creations that expressed what he could not say aloud, gratitude, love, the ache of abandonment transformed into beauty. Eventually, he returned to Olympus, not as a supplicant, but as the greatest craftsman in the cosmos. He built the palaces of the gods, forged Zeus's thunderbolts, created armor that could not be pierced, weapons that never missed their targets, automatons that moved and thought like living things. He was given Aphrodite as his wife, beautiful Aphrodite, whom we must talk about now, for she had arrived on Olympus by a strange road of her own. Remember Uranus? The sky castrated by Kronos, bleeding as he retreated upward? Remember we said that from the foam where parts of him fell into the sea, something was forming? That something was Aphrodite. She emerged fully formed from the sea foam near Cyprus, rising naked and perfect from the waves. Born not from parents in the usual way, but from violence and ocean and the generative power of severed divinity. She was beauty itself made flesh, desire incarnate, the goddess of love, of sex, of the irresistible pull between beings. She stepped onto the shore and flowers bloomed where her feet touched sand. The west wind clothed her gently. The hours, goddesses of the seasons, adorned her with jewelry and led her to Olympus, where every god who saw her fell instantly in love. To prevent war among the gods over her hand, Zeus decreed she would marry Hephaestus. The most beautiful goddess wed to the lame craftsman god. It seemed like a cruel joke to some, but perhaps Zeus thought that Hephaestus, who knew rejection and pain, would treasure Aphrodite as she deserved. Or perhaps he simply wanted to avoid the chaos of letting her choose, for if she chose one god, all the others would be enraged. Aphrodite married Hephaestus, but she did not remain faithful. Could not, perhaps, for she was desire itself, and desire does not limit itself to one object. She took lovers, most notably Ares, that god of war. Beauty and violence entwined in secret, meeting while Hephaestus worked in his forge, creating beauty through craft while his wife created passion through presence. When Hephaestus learned of the affair, and he did learn, for the sun god told him, he forged a trap, an invisible net of unbreakable chains. And one night, when Ares and Aphrodite were together in bed, Hephaestus sprung the trap. The net fell over them, binding them in their nakedness, and Hephaestus called all the gods to come see. It was meant to be humiliating, a moment of revenge. But the gods who came mostly laughed. Some said they'd happily endure such humiliation for a night with Aphrodite. Others pitied Hephaestus, who had tried to hold what could not be held. Eventually he released them, and the marriage continued in its strange, broken way. And Aphrodite continued to be Aphrodite, goddess of love, of beauty, of desire, of the way hearts beat faster and reason dissolves when attraction takes hold. There were others too on Olympus. Hermes, the messenger god, born to Zeus and the nymph Maia. He was clever and quick, inventive and mischievous. As an infant, he stole Apollo's cattle, invented the lyre from a tortoise shell, and talked his way out of punishment with such charm that he became the god's herald, flying between realms with his winged sandals, delivering messages, guiding souls to the underworld, watching over travelers and thieves and merchants and all who moved between places. And Dionysus, the latecomer, the god born from Zeus's thigh in another impossible birth. His mother Semele, a mortal woman, was tricked by Hera into asking Zeus to reveal his true form. When he did, his divine radiance burned her to ash. But Zeus snatched the unborn Dionysus from her body and sewed him into his own thigh, carrying him to term himself. And thus Dionysus was born twice, once from a mortal mother, once from his father's leg, forever between divine and mortal, never quite fitting the usual categories. He became the god of wine, of ecstasy, of the madness that comes from letting go of control, of theater and transformation, and the wildness that civilized people keep hidden until they drink enough to let it out. He wandered the world more than he sat on Olympus, teaching mortals to make wine, gathering followers who danced themselves into trances and spoke in tongues, and sometimes tore things apart with their bare hands in their divine frenzy. 12 thrones on Olympus, though who occupied them shifted sometimes in the tellings. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Hermes, and either Hestia or Dionysus, depending on the story. Hestia, some say, gave up her throne willingly so Dionysus could join the council, preferring the quiet of the hearth to the politics of divine rule. These were the Olympians, the new gods, the powers that would shape the age to come. And beneath them, around them, supporting them, were countless other divine beings. Nymphs of trees and streams, minor gods of specific things, doors, boundaries, healing, childbirth, weather patterns, specific rivers or mountains. The world was full of divinity in this age, full of powers and presences and beings who watched mortal life unfold. Take a moment now, let your mind rest with this image. Olympus, bright and eternal, the gods in their halls, looking down at the world. Can you picture it? The white marble, the golden decorations, the sense of power and permanence. And yet, even in their perfection, even in their immortality, the gods were not so different from those who would worship them. They loved and fought and schemed and suffered. They made mistakes. They let passion override reason. They hurt each other and helped each other and existed in that complicated space where family is both shelter and storm. Your breathing is slower now, deeper, the way breathing becomes when sleep is close. And the story continues, gentle as a stream, carrying you forward into the next age. For now we must speak of mortals, of humans, of the people who would populate the earth and give the gods their purpose, who would build temples and offer sacrifices and live brief, burning lives while the gods watched from above. Where did humanity come from? And how did they learn to survive in a world ruled by powers so far beyond their understanding? Rest here, in this quiet space between divine and mortal, and when you're ready, we'll drift into the story of humanity's creation. Part 7. The Age of Mortals, Prometheus and the Gift of Fire. In the beginning, there were no humans. Only gods and titans, monsters and nature spirits, the divine beings who shaped and inhabited the young world. The earth was green and beautiful, full of animals and birds and fish, but there was no one to look up at the stars and wonder what they meant. No one to ask questions. No one to worship. Some gods thought this was fine. The world was peaceful without mortals. But others saw the emptiness and wanted to fill it. There was a titan named Prometheus. His name meant forethought. The one who thinks ahead, who sees what is coming. He had sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy, had fought against his own kind because he saw that change was necessary, and Zeus had rewarded him by letting him remain free when the other titans were imprisoned. Prometheus looked at the empty earth and saw potential. He and his brother Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, the one who realizes too late, were given a task by Zeus to create life to populate the world. Epimetheus began immediately, enthusiastically, forming animals of all kinds from clay and giving them gifts. To the lion, strength and courage. To the eagle, sharp sight and wings. To the deer, speed. To the tortoise, a protective shell. To the fish, the ability to breathe water. To the bear, thick fur against the cold. He distributed gifts freely, generously, without thinking ahead, as was his nature. Prometheus worked more slowly, more carefully. He shaped clay into a different form, upright, walking on two legs, with hands that could grasp and shape, with faces that looked upward toward the sky instead of down at the ground. He formed humans in the image of the gods, some say, made them unique among all the animals. But when it came time to give humanity their gifts, Epimetheus had already used everything up. Strength was gone. Speed was gone. Natural weapons, claws, fangs, venom, were distributed. Thick hides, warm fur, protective shells, all given to other creatures. Humans stood naked and vulnerable, weaker than lions, slower than deer, with no natural defenses except their cleverness and their upright stance. Prometheus looked at his creations and felt something. Not quite fatherly love, perhaps, but a sense of responsibility. These beings were his work, and he had made them inadequate for survival. They would freeze in winter. They would starve because they could not catch game easily. They would fall prey to every predator with claws and teeth. This could not stand, but Zeus had established an order. Certain things belonged to gods. Certain things belonged to mortals. The boundaries were meant to be clear, inviolate, and one of the things that belonged exclusively to the gods was fire. Not the fire of the earth, volcanic heat, the warmth of geothermal springs, but divine fire, the transformative flame that could cook food, warm bodies, illuminate darkness, shape metal, drive away beasts. The fire that meant civilization. The fire that would let weak, naked humans survive, and perhaps even thrive. Prometheus knew that taking this fire would be theft, would be defiance, would anger Zeus, who did not tolerate defiance well. But he looked at humanity struggling and suffering, and he made a choice. He went to the workshops of Hephaestus. Remember Hephaestus, the craftsman god, working always in his forge. The forges were filled with divine flame, burning hotter and brighter than any earthly fire. And Prometheus took a fennel stalk, a giant fennel with its hollow center, and he concealed a coal of divine fire inside it. Then he descended to earth, moving quietly, quickly, before anyone could stop him. And he gave the fire to humanity. Picture that moment. The first flame, burning in the darkness. The first humans gathering around it, feeling warmth for the first time. Seeing light push back the night. Understanding slowly what this meant, that they could cook their food, could shape metal into tools, could survive winters that would have killed them before. Humanity learned quickly. Learned to keep fires burning, to share coals from family to family, to build hearths and pass down the knowledge of fire tending from generation to generation. And with fire came everything else: pottery, metalworking, cooking, warmth, protection, the ability to stay awake after dark and tell stories by firelight. They were still weak, still mortal, but now they had a chance. Zeus discovered what Prometheus had done, and his anger was terrible, not just because a theft had occurred, but because boundaries had been violated, because a Titan had defied an Olympian, because humans now had something they were not supposed to have, something that brought them closer to divinity. "You have given them fire," Zeus said, his voice like thunder building. "You have taken what was ours and given it to your clay creatures. This cannot go unpunished." Prometheus stood before Zeus, unflinching. They would have died without it. They were made too weak. I only corrected an imbalance. You decided what was balanced. Zeus's lightning crackled around his shoulders. You chose to defy my order? I chose to protect what I created. Zeus could have killed Prometheus then, could have blasted him with lightning, scattered his divine essence to the winds. But that would be too quick, too merciful. Zeus wanted Prometheus to understand, deeply and permanently, what defiance cost. He ordered Prometheus chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, not bound with rope, which might fray, but with unbreakable chains forged by Hephaestus. Chained so he could not move, could not escape, could stand or sit or lie down. And then Zeus sent an eagle, a great bird with sharp beak and tearing talons, to visit Prometheus every day. Every day, the eagle would come and tear open Prometheus's belly and eat his liver. And every night, because Prometheus was immortal, his liver would regenerate. And every morning, the eagle would return. Day after day, month after month, year after year, the pain never lessening, the torture never ending. Prometheus chained to his rock, suffering eternally for the gift he gave humanity. He did not scream. He did not beg for mercy. He simply endured, knowing that somewhere below, humans sat around fires and told stories and survived because of what he had done. This was the price of helping humanity. This was what it meant to defy Zeus. But Zeus was not finished. Punishing Prometheus was not enough. Humanity itself had to be punished for accepting the stolen gift. And so Zeus conceived of a different kind of vengeance. Something subtle. Something that would seem like a gift but carry darkness within it. He ordered Hephaestus to create something new. something that had never existed before. He ordered the creation of the first woman. Now let us pause here and speak carefully. This story, as the ancient Greeks told it, carries the prejudices of its time. The story of Pandora, for that is who this first woman would be, is not kind to women. It suggests they are a punishment, a curse, something inflicted on men. We must understand this as a product of an ancient, patriarchal culture, not as truth. But the story still has power, still reveals something about how the Greeks understood the complexity of existence. So let us tell it, gently, as another layer in this long dream of myths. Hephaestus shaped her from clay, as Prometheus had shaped the first humans. But where Prometheus had made his creations simple and rough, Hephaestus made this woman perfect. Gave her the form the gods found beautiful, graceful and lovely, and impossible to ignore. Each god gave her a gift. Aphrodite gave her beauty and desire. Hermes gave her cunning and skill with words. Apollo gave her musical talent. Athena taught her crafts, weaving especially the creating of patterns from simple threads. And Zeus gave her curiosity. Insatiable, relentless curiosity. The need to know what should not be known, to open what should remain closed. They named her Pandora, all gifted, for she had received presents from all the gods. And Zeus gave her one more thing. A jar, later translations would call it a box, but the Greeks said pithos, a large jar, sealed tight, beautiful to look at, heavy and mysterious. Never open this, Zeus told her. It is yours to keep, but never, under any circumstances, must you open it. Of course, telling someone not to do something, especially someone fashioned with irresistible curiosity, is the best way to ensure they eventually will. Zeus sent Pandora to Earth, to be a wife for Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother. Remember Epimetheus, afterthought, the one who acts first and thinks later. Prometheus had warned his brother, accept no gifts from Zeus. Whatever he offers will be a trap. But when Epimetheus saw Pandora, beautiful and fascinating and alive, he forgot his brother's warning. He welcomed her into his home, married her, was happy for a time, in the way mortals are happy when they don't yet know what sorrow means. And Pandora lived with the sealed jar in her house, looked at it every day, wondered what was inside, resisted the urge to open it, for she had been commanded not to. But the curiosity grew and grew, like a whisper that gets louder, like an itch that demands scratching. What do you think was in the jar? Gold? Magic? Secrets worth knowing? Divine wisdom? Pandora wondered the same things. And one day, or one night, perhaps, when Epimetheus was sleeping and she was alone with her curiosity and her gift from the gods, she reached for the lid. Just a peek, she told herself. Just to see. Just to know. Then she would close it again, and no one would ever know she had looked. She lifted the lid, and out rushed everything terrible that had been contained within. Disease and sickness, envy and spite, old age and death, hatred and war, famine and pain. All the sufferings that humanity had not yet experienced came pouring out of the jar like smoke, like wasps, like dark dreams made manifest. They spread across the world in an instant, entered human bodies and human hearts. Suddenly, people who had lived in simple health began to sicken. Suddenly, those who had been young forever began to age. Suddenly, death came to humanity, real death, final and certain. Suddenly, people who had been friends turned against each other out of envy or pride. Pandora slammed the lid shut, terrified, horrified by what she had released. But it was too late. The evils were loose in the world. They had escaped and would never be recaptured. But one thing remained in the jar. One thing had not yet escaped when she closed the lid. Trapped at the bottom, beneath all the evils, was Elpis. Hope. Some say hope remained trapped, and thus humanity lives without it, suffering evils with no hope to sustain them. But most tellings say that hope escaped too, eventually, that it emerged last, after all the suffering, and that it stays with humanity still. That even in the worst moments, even when disease and death and hatred press close, hope remains. Quiet perhaps. Fragile, but present. This was Zeus's punishment for accepting Prometheus's gift. Humanity got fire, yes, got civilization, got the ability to thrive. But they also got suffering, got mortality, got all the pains that make life difficult and dark. And Prometheus, chained to his rock, watched this unfold. Watched humanity receive both his gift and Zeus's curse. And he bore his torment knowing that he had helped them, even if his help had brought its own complications. For nothing is simple in myths. No gift comes without cost. No act of defiance goes unpunished. But also, and this is important, no act of compassion is wasted. Humanity survived. humanity learned. Humanity grew and built and thrived, even with all their newfound sufferings. They lit fires and told stories. They forged tools and built cities. They looked up at the stars that Prometheus had, in some tellings, given them knowledge of, and they wondered and named and tried to understand. They lit fires and told stories. They forged tools and built cities. They looked up at the stars that Prometheus had, in some tellings, given them knowledge of, and they wondered and named and tried to understand. And Prometheus remained on his rock, enduring, until much later, in a different story, a hero named Heracles would free him. But that is a tale for another part of our journey. For now, let yourself rest with this image, firelight in darkness. Humanity huddled around flames, telling stories, surviving. And somewhere, on a distant mountain, a titan suffering for love of his creations. Your eyes are heavy now, you're breathing deep and slow, and we drift onward through the myths, like a boat on a calm sea at night. Part 8. The Seasons of Sorrow, Demeter and Persephone. Not all myths are about heroes and wars. Some are about mothers and daughters. Some are about loss so profound it changes the world itself. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, had a daughter named Persephone. In some tellings, her name was Kore, simply the maiden, before her transformation. She was young and beautiful, innocent in the way of those who have not yet encountered darkness. She loved flowers especially, loved to gather them in meadows, to weave crowns of blossoms, to run through fields with her nymph companions. Demeter loved her daughter more than anything, more than her role as goddess, more than her place on Olympus. Persephone was her joy, her light, her reason for making things grow. Picture them together, if you can, a mother and daughter in an endless spring. The world always blooming when they were together, laughter and golden light, the simple happiness of loving someone and being loved in return. But in the underworld, Hades had grown lonely. He ruled his dark kingdom with justice and patience, but he ruled alone. The souls of the dead were not companions. They were faded, quiet, barely themselves anymore. And the underworld, for all its wealth of gems and precious metals, was a lonely place. No flowers grew there. No sunlight reached. Nothing changed, nothing grew, nothing lived except the Lord of the Dead himself. One day, Hades rose to the upper world, a rare journey, for he seldom left his realm. And he saw Persephone in a meadow, gathering flowers with her friends. Saw her laugh, saw her young and alive, and everything his kingdom was not. And he wanted her, not gently, not with courtship. He simply wanted, and he was a god, and gods in the ancient stories often took what they wanted without asking. The earth opened. A chasm split the meadow, black and sudden and wide. Hades drove his chariot up through the gap, his dark horses screaming, and he seized Persephone before she could run or scream or understand what was happening. Her companions scattered in terror. The flowers fell from her hands, and Hades drove back down into the earth, taking her with him, the ground closing behind them as if nothing had happened at all. One moment she was in sunlight, gathering flowers. The next she was in absolute darkness, being carried deeper and deeper into a realm where no living thing should go. Above, Demeter felt it, felt the sudden absence of her daughter, felt the wrongness in the world, the way a mother knows when something terrible has happened even before anyone tells her. She began to search, ran across the earth calling Persephone's name, asked every being she met, gods, nymphs, mortals, animals, if they had seen her daughter. But no one knew. No one had seen where the girl went. She had simply vanished, as if swallowed by the earth itself. For 9 days and 9 nights, Demeter searched without rest, without eating, without stopping. Her grief was so vast it began to affect the world. Crops stopped growing, flowers wilted. The earth, responding to the sorrow of the goddess who governed it, began to die. On the 10th day, Helios the sun god, who sees everything from his position in the sky, took pity on her and told her the truth. Your daughter is in the underworld. Hades has taken her to be his queen. Demeter's grief turned to rage. She went to Zeus, demanded he force Hades to return Persephone. But Zeus was caught between his brother and his sister. Hades had not technically broken any laws. He had taken Persephone, yes, but gods often took mortals as consorts, and Persephone was, after all, Zeus's daughter too, making the match not unreasonable by divine standards. She will adjust, Zeus said, trying to placate Demeter. She will be queen of the underworld. It is not such a terrible fate. But Demeter did not care about reason or politics or the perspectives of gods. She cared that her daughter had been stolen, that Persephone had not chosen this, that somewhere in the darkness, her child was probably terrified and alone. If my daughter does not return, Demeter said, her voice cold as winter. Nothing will grow again. Ever. The world will starve. Humanity will die. And you, Zeus, will rule over a dead world. And she withdrew her blessing from the earth. The grain stopped growing. The trees bore no fruit. The vines produced no grapes. Animals stopped reproducing. The whole world began to slide toward famine and death. This was the first winter, some say. The first time the earth knew cold and barrenness and the absence of growth. Zeus saw his sister's determination and humanity's suffering, and he realized she would not relent. He sent Hermes, the messenger, down to the underworld to negotiate. In the realm of the dead, Persephone had indeed been terrified at first. Hades had been, not cruel exactly, but not gentle either. He expected her to accept her new role, to be his queen, to adapt to the darkness. The underworld was vast and rich, he told her. She would have power here, would rule beside him, would be honored by all the dead. But Persephone mourned her mother, her freedom, the sunlight and flowers she would never see again. She refused to eat, for there was a rule, ancient and binding, that anyone who ate food in the underworld would be bound to it forever. Hades tried to tempt her, offered her delicacies, treasures, everything his realm could provide. But Persephone refused it all, holding on to the last thread of hope that somehow she might escape. Then Hermes arrived with Zeus's decree. Persephone must be allowed to return, or the world above would die. Hades knew he had to comply, but he was clever in his dark way. As Persephone prepared to leave, finally allowing herself to hope, Hades offered her one last thing. A pomegranate, sweet and ruby red, the only fruit that grew in the underworld's gardens. Eat, he said. You have had nothing for so long. Just a few seeds, to sustain you for your journey home. Was it kindness? Or manipulation? The stories don't quite agree. But Persephone, overcome with relief at the thought of returning to her mother, took the pomegranate and ate 6 seeds. Just 6 small seeds. But it was enough. When she returned to the surface, when she ran into her mother's arms and they wept together in joy and relief, when it seemed everything would be restored, Hades sent word of what had happened. She ate from the food of the underworld. 6 pomegranate seeds. She is bound to my realm now. The rules are clear. Zeus, forced to judge between his brother's claim and his sister's anguish, made a compromise. A solution that satisfied no one completely, but kept the world from dying. Persephone will spend part of each year in the underworld, he decreed. 1 month for each seed she ate. 6 months with Hades as queen of the dead, and 6 months above with her mother in the light. And so the pattern was set. Each year, when Persephone must descend to the underworld to fulfill her obligation, Demeter grieves. The earth grows cold. Plants die back. Animals hibernate. The world experiences winter, the season of sorrow, when the goddess of the harvest mourns her absent daughter. And each spring, when Persephone returns, when mother and daughter reunite, Demeter's joy causes everything to bloom again. Flowers push through soil. Trees bud and leaf. The world warms and grows and celebrates the return of the maiden. This is why we have seasons, the Greeks said. Not because of the earth's tilt or its orbit around the sun. They did not know such things. But because a mother loves her daughter, and the world itself responds to that love and that loss. Persephone, in time, became something more complex than the innocent maiden who gathered flowers. She became Persephone, queen of the underworld, who ruled the dead with justice and sometimes with mercy. She was both Kore the maiden and Persephone the terrible, both the spring goddess and the death goddess, both her mother's daughter and Hades' wife. Some say she came to love Hades eventually, or at least to accept him, to find power and purpose in her dual role. Some say she never forgave him, never stopped resenting her abduction, but made the best of her circumstances. The myths don't give us certainty. They give us complexity. What they do give us is this, a story about loss and return, about how even the gods must experience separation from those they love, about how some wounds, some changes cannot be undone, only adapted to, only lived with, only woven into a new pattern of existence. Take a breath now. Let yourself feel the rhythm of that story. Descent and return. Loss and reunion. Winter and spring. The world turning through its cycles, forever marked by a mother's love and a daughter's transformation. Your body is heavy now, sinking deeper into rest. And we continue forward, gently, into more stories. For the gods had established their order, and now the age of heroes was beginning. The time when mortals, with divine blood in their veins, would perform impossible deeds and shape the world in their own ways. Part 9. The heroic age begins, Perseus and the Gorgon. The gods, established on Olympus, began to interact more and more with humanity. And from these interactions came children, demigods, half mortal and half divine, who inherited power from their godly parents but remained vulnerable to death like their mortal mothers and fathers. These demigods became heroes, performed great deeds, faced monsters, and completed impossible tasks. And their stories became the foundation of Greek mythology as most know it. Tales of courage and cleverness, of hubris and tragedy, of mortals reaching for greatness, even knowing they would eventually fail and die. Let us begin with Perseus, who was born in a tower. His mother was Danae, princess of Argos. Her father, King Acrisius, had received a prophecy. Always there are prophecies, that his daughter's son would one day kill him. Fearing this fate, Acrisius did what fearful men in power often do. He tried to prevent the prophecy by force. He locked Danae in a bronze tower, a prison where no man could reach her. If she had no husband, no lover, she could have no son. The prophecy would be thwarted. But Zeus saw Danae in her lonely tower and desired her. And Zeus, as we have learned, was not deterred by obstacles. He transformed himself into a shower of golden light, golden rain, some say, and entered the tower through a gap in the roof. He came to Danae as light and possibility, and she conceived a child. Perseus was born in that bronze tower. Danae kept him secret as long as she could, but eventually, Acrisius heard an infant crying. He discovered the child and raged, not at Zeus, whom he could not punish, but at his daughter. He could not bring himself to kill them directly. That would bring the gods' wrath, and besides, they were his blood. But he could not keep them either, not with the prophecy hanging over him. So he made another choice, thinking it would absolve him of responsibility. He sealed Danae and the infant Perseus in a wooden chest, and cast them into the sea, letting the waves decide their fate. Picture that, a mother and baby in a sealed box, tossed on the ocean. Dark water, the sound of waves, the gentle rocking that might be soothing if it weren't so terrifying. Danae holding her son, singing to him perhaps, keeping him calm while she wondered if they would drown or starve or simply drift forever. But Perseus had divine blood. Zeus watched over them, in his distant way. The chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys found it and broke it open. He took in Danae and Perseus, gave them shelter, raised the boy as his own nephew. Perseus grew up on that small island, not knowing who his father was, not knowing that he was destined for great things. He was strong and quick and clever, as demigods often were, but he lived simply, helping Dictys with his nets, learning the life of a fisherman. Then the king of Seriphos, Polydectes, saw Danae and desired her. But she refused him. She had no interest in marrying this king who was not kind, who looked at her as a possession to be claimed. And Perseus, now grown, protected his mother from the king's advances. Polydectes resented this, resented that a common fisherman's nephew dared to interfere with the king's desires. So he devised a plan to get rid of Perseus. He announced that he was going to marry someone else, not Danae, and that all the men of the island should bring him gifts of horses as tribute. Perseus had no horses, no wealth to buy them. In front of everyone, Polydectes mocked him. "If you cannot bring horses," the king said with false generosity, "bring me another gift instead, something impressive, something that proves your worth." Perseus, young and proud and stung by the mockery, made a rash promise. "I will bring you the head of Medusa." The gathered crowd went silent, for everyone knew of Medusa, the gorgon whose gaze turned living flesh to stone. Medusa, who had once been beautiful but now was monstrous, with serpents for hair and eyes that meant death to anyone who met them. Medusa, who was impossible to approach, impossible to fight, impossible to kill. Polydectes smiled. "I accept your offer. Bring me Medusa's head, or do not return at all." Perseus left the court realizing he had promised something impossible. He had no idea where Medusa lived, no plan for how to fight her, no hope of surviving such a quest. He was a fisherman's nephew who had spoken rashly, and now he would die for it. But remember, Perseus had divine blood, and the gods sometimes helped their children, especially when their pride was at stake. Athena came to him first, appearing in her gray-eyed wisdom, her armor bright. "You spoke foolishly," she said, not unkindly. "But you spoke, and now you must follow through. I will help you, for Medusa offended me once, and I have not forgotten. The story of why Medusa was cursed is dark, and we will tell it gently. Medusa had been a beautiful priestess in Athena's temple. Poseidon had desired her, had violated her in that holy place. And Athena, angry that her temple had been defiled but unable to punish Poseidon directly, had punished Medusa instead. transformed her into a monster, gave her serpent hair and a deadly gaze, made her hideous and dangerous and alone. It was not fair, but the gods were not always fair. Now Athena would use Perseus to rid herself of the creature she had created. She gave him a polished bronze shield. "Do not look at Medusa directly," she instructed. "Use this shield as a mirror. See her reflection only, and you may survive." Hermes came too, brought winged sandals that would let Perseus fly, and a special sword, a harp curved and sharp that could cut through even a Gorgon's neck. "You will need more than weapons," Hermes said. "You must find the Grey Sisters first. They know where the Gorgons dwell." The Grey Sisters, 3 ancient women who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them. They lived at the edge of the world, in perpetual twilight, and knew many secrets. Perseus traveled to their cave, watching as they passed the eye between them, taking turns seeing. At the moment when the eye was being handed from one sister to another, Perseus darted forward and snatched it. The sisters cried out, suddenly all blind, groping in the darkness. "I will return your eye," Perseus said, "if you tell me where to find Medusa." The sisters had no choice. They told him of the Gorgon's lair, on a distant island, where Medusa and her 2 immortal sisters dwelt surrounded by the stone statues of warriors who had tried and failed to kill them. They told him also of the nymphs who possessed 3 more items he would need: a cap of invisibility, a magical bag that could safely hold Medusa's head, and directions to the island. Perseus found the nymphs, received their gifts, and flew on Hermes' sandals across the sea to the Gorgon's island. He arrived at dusk, when the light was uncertain, when shadows were long. The island was silent except for the wind. Statues stood everywhere, men frozen in their final moments, faces locked in expressions of horror, weapons raised uselessly. The stone warriors were testament to Medusa's power, warnings to turn back. Perseus moved carefully, quietly, the cap of invisibility concealing him. He could hear the Gorgons, 3 voices, arguing or speaking among themselves. He crept closer, using Athena's shield as a mirror, watching the reflection so he would not accidentally see Medusa directly. There, in the bronze surface, he saw her. Saw the serpents writhing where hair should be. Saw the face that had once been beautiful, now twisted and terrible. Saw her eyes, which even in reflection held a hint of their deadly power. The other 2 Gorgons, Stheno and Euryale, immortal and unkillable, were sleeping nearby. But Medusa herself was awake, staring into the distance, perhaps thinking about the life she had lost, the curse she bore. Perseus raised the harp, watched her reflection, moved silently closer. The serpents on her head began to sense something, began to hiss, but before Medusa could turn, before she could meet his eyes, he struck. One clean cut, guided by reflection, the divine blade sliding through flesh and bone. Medusa's head fell, serpents still writhing. Her body collapsed, and from her neck, impossibly, burst 2 beings, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior with a golden sword. They had been waiting inside her all along, children of Poseidon conceived during the violation in Athena's temple, born now in this moment of her death. Perseus grabbed Medusa's head, stuffed it into the magical bag without looking at it directly, and fled as the other 2 Gorgons woke and screamed in rage. But he wore the cap of invisibility, flew with Hermes' sandals, and they could not find him even as they searched the sky, shrieking their sister's name. Perseus flew back toward Seriphos, his impossible quest complete. Along the way, he had other adventures, saw the Titan Atlas and showed him Medusa's head, turning him to stone, which is why Atlas became the mountain range that holds up the sky. Rescued a princess named Andromeda, who was chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster. Fell in love with her and promised to make her his wife. But eventually, he returned to Seriphos, found that in his absence, King Polydectes had been pressuring Danae, threatening her, trying to force her to marry him. Dictys the fisherman had been protecting her, but he was old and had little power against the king. Perseus walked into Polydectes' court. The king laughed to see him return, not believing he had actually completed the quest. "You survived?" Polydectes mocked. "Where is this legendary head you promised?" "Here," Perseus said, and pulled Medusa's head from the bag. Everyone who looked, Polydectes and all his cruel advisors, turned instantly to stone. Frozen statues, stone replacing flesh in a heartbeat. Perseus gave the head to Athena, who set it on her shield, the Aegis, where it would remain forever, a reminder of Medusa and a weapon against Athena's enemies. He made Dictys the new king of Seriphos, a reward for kindness and protection. And he married Andromeda and prepared to live in happiness. But there was still the prophecy. Still the prediction that Acrisius would die by his grandson's hand. Acrisius, hearing that Perseus was alive and seeking to reunite with his grandfather, fled from Argos in fear. He traveled to distant Larissa, thinking he could hide from fate. But Perseus traveled too, went to Larissa for funeral games held in honor of a dead king. He participated in the athletic competitions, as heroes did. And during the discus throw, his throw went wide, perhaps a gust of wind, perhaps simply chance, and the heavy discus struck a man in the crowd. That man was Acrisius, who had been watching the games, thinking himself safe and anonymous among the crowd. He died instantly. The prophecy fulfilled, not through murder or intention, but through accident. Through the unpredictable movements of fate that cannot be escaped no matter how far you run. Perseus mourned the grandfather he barely knew, fulfilled the funeral rites, and understood, perhaps, that some things are simply meant to be, that prophecies have their own power, their own ways of coming true. He ruled well afterward, founded the city of Mycenae, had children with Andromeda, lived a long life for a hero, which meant he died in his bed, old and honored, rather than young on a battlefield. And when he died, the gods placed him among the stars, Perseus the hero, forever holding his sword, forever victorious over Medusa. Andromeda was placed beside him, and Pegasus too, flying eternally across the night sky. Take a moment now. Rest in this story of prophecy and fate, of a hero who succeeded against impossible odds but could not escape what was destined. Your eyes are heavy, your mind is drifting, and the stories continue, gentle as starlight, carrying you deeper into sleep. For there were other heroes, so many heroes, and one above all others stands out, the strongest, the most troubled, the one who performed 12 labors and died betrayed by the very strength that made him great. Let us meet Heracles now, in the soft darkness, and follow his difficult journey. Part 10. Heracles, the strongest and the most cursed. His name meant glory of Hera, which was ironic, for Hera hated him from the moment of his birth. He was born Alcides, son of Alcmene, a mortal woman of Thebes. But his true father was Zeus, who had disguised himself as Alcmene's husband to seduce her. Another of Zeus's deceptions, another child born from divine desire. Hera, learning of yet another bastard child of her unfaithful husband, was filled with rage. But this rage was different. This time, she would not just punish the mother. She would punish the child himself, punish him throughout his entire life, make him suffer for the crime of being born. When Heracles was still an infant, 8 months old, lying in his cradle beside his mortal twin brother Iphicles, Hera sent 2 enormous serpents to strangle him in his sleep. The snakes slithered into the nursery, fangs dripping venom, coils thick as a man's arm. Iphicles woke and screamed in terror. But Heracles, baby Heracles, barely old enough to understand danger, reached out with his small hands and grabbed the serpents by their throats. And he squeezed with strength that no infant should possess, with power inherited from Zeus himself. The snakes thrashed and writhed, but Heracles held on, laughing at their struggles, until they went limp in his grip. His parents rushed in to find him playing with 2 dead serpents, waving them like toys, while his brother cowered in the corner. They knew then that he was no ordinary child. Heracles grew quickly, as demigods do, grew strong beyond measure, brave beyond reason. He was taught by the finest teachers, music from Apollo, archery from Artemis followers, wrestling from the heroes of his time. He could bend iron bars, lift boulders that 10 men together could not move, and fight with a ferocity that made even trained warriors step back in fear. But with his strength came a temper, a rage that, once ignited, was almost impossible to control. And Hera watched, waiting for the perfect moment to twist his strength against him. Heracles married Megra, princess of Thebes, had children with her, sons he loved, a family he protected. For a time, he was happy. For a time, it seemed his strength would be used for good, for protection, for building rather than destroying. Then Hera struck. She sent madness to Heracles. Not metaphorical madness, literal divine insanity, a fog that descended over his mind and warped his perceptions. In his madness, Heracles saw enemies where there were none, saw monsters where his children played, saw threats to his family that existed only in his twisted vision. And in his madness, with his terrible strength, he killed them. Killed Megra and his children, believing he was protecting them from enemies, believing he was a hero saving his family. When the madness lifted, when Hera's curse released him, and he saw clearly again, he found himself surrounded by the bodies of everyone he loved, realized what he had done, understood that his own hands had destroyed his own family. The grief and horror nearly destroyed him. He wanted to die, to end himself, to stop existing in a world where he had committed such horror. But suicide was considered a coward's death, and Heracles was not a coward, only cursed. He went to the oracle at Delphi, asked Apollo's priestess what he could do to atone for his terrible crime. The oracle told him to go to Mycenae, to serve King Eurystheus for 12 years, to complete whatever labors the king demanded. Only through service, the oracle said, through tasks impossible and degrading and dangerous, can you purify yourself. Only by using your strength in the ways others direct can you prove that your power can be controlled. So Heracles went to Mycenae, and Eurystheus, who was a petty, cowardly man made king through divine manipulation, delighted in having the world's strongest hero bound to his service. He devised 12 labors, each one designed to be impossible, each one intended to kill Heracles. But Heracles was already living in death in a way, already suffering worse than any monster could make him suffer. And so he set about his labors with grim determination. The first labor, kill the Nemean lion, a beast with hide so thick that no weapon could pierce it. Heracles tracked it to its cave, fought it with his bare hands when his sword and arrows proved useless, strangled it just as he had strangled those serpents as an infant. He skinned the lion using its own claws, the only thing sharp enough to cut its hide, and wore its pelt as armor, invulnerable and fearsome. The second labor, kill the Lernaean hydra, a many-headed serpent that grew 2 heads for every one that was cut off. Heracles fought it in the swamps with his nephew Iolaus helping him. Every time Heracles cut off a head, Iolaus would sear the neck with a torch, cauterizing the wound so new heads couldn't grow. Together, they defeated the monster, and Heracles dipped his arrows in the hydra's blood, making them deadly with poison. The third labor, capture the golden hind of Artemis, a sacred deer that could outrun arrows. Heracles pursued it for a full year, patiently, carefully, until finally he managed to trap it without harming it and bring it back alive, respecting the goddess's creature even in his service to Eurystheus. The fourth labor, capture the Erymanthian boar, a giant beast terrorizing the mountains. Heracles drove it into deep snow where it tired and slowed, then caught it in a net and carried it back to Mycenae. Eurystheus was so frightened when he saw the massive boar that he hid in a buried bronze jar and begged Heracles to take it away. The fifth labor, clean the Augean stables in a single day. King Augeas had thousands of cattle, and their stables hadn't been cleaned in 30 years. Mountains of filth filled the space, and Eurystheus assigned this task to humiliate Heracles, to make the strongest hero in the world do the work of a stable hand. But Heracles was clever as well as strong. He diverted 2 rivers to flow through the stables, washing away all the filth in a few hours. The labor was completed, though Eurystheus refused to count it, claiming Heracles had cheated. The sixth labor, drive away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with bronze beaks and metallic feathers they could launch like arrows. Heracles used castanets given to him by Athena to create a loud noise that startled the birds into flight, then shot them down with his poison arrows. The seventh labor, capture the Cretan bull, a magnificent beast that was terrorizing the island of Crete. Heracles wrestled it into submission, rode it across the sea back to Mycenae, then released it. It wandered until it reached Marathon, where it would later be killed by another hero, Theseus. The eighth labor, steal the mares of Diomedes, horses that fed on human flesh. Heracles subdued them, then fed their cruel master to them, which calmed their savage nature enough that he could lead them back to Eurystheus. The ninth labor, obtain the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, the warrior women who lived without men and fought with legendary skill. Hippolyta was willing to give Heracles the belt peacefully. She admired his strength and reputation. But Hera, still watching, still hating, disguised herself and spread a rumor among the Amazons that Heracles intended to kidnap their queen. The Amazons attacked, and in the confusion, Hippolyta was killed. Heracles took the belt, but mourned the death of a woman who had been kind to him. The 10th labor, capture the cattle of Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies who lived at the edge of the world. Heracles journeyed farther than any hero had traveled, crossed the ocean, killed Geryon and his 2-headed dog, and drove the cattle back across the entirety of the Mediterranean. A journey that took months and involved countless smaller adventures. The 11th labor, steal the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by a 100-headed dragon and located in a garden at the world's end. Heracles tricked Atlas, who held up the sky, into retrieving the apples for him. When Atlas tried to leave Heracles holding the sky permanently, Heracles tricked him back, asking Atlas to hold the sky just for a moment while Heracles adjusted his cloak. Atlas fell for the deception and took the sky back, and Heracles left with the apples. The 12th and final labor: descend into the underworld and capture Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guarded the gates of Hades. No living person was supposed to enter the realm of the dead, but Heracles descended anyway. He met Hades, who agreed to let him take Cerberus on one condition: that he subdue the beast without using weapons. Heracles wrestled Cerberus with his bare hands, overcame the monster's 3 sets of fangs, and carried him to the surface. Eurystheus, seeing the hellhound, panicked and released Heracles from his service immediately. The 12 labors were complete. Heracles had atoned, in the eyes of the gods. He was purified, but he was not at peace. He remarried, tried to build a new life, but his strength and his curse followed him. Eventually, he died not in battle, not fighting monsters, but through betrayal and poison. His second wife, Deianira, tricked by a dying centaur, gave Heracles a robe soaked in what she thought was a love potion, but was actually hydra venom. The poison burned him, and not even his strength could overcome it. In agony, Heracles built his own funeral pyre on Mount Ida, lay down upon it, and asked to be burned alive rather than die slowly from the poison. As the flames consumed his mortal body, his divine half ascended to Olympus, where Zeus welcomed him as a god. Hera, seeing that Heracles had overcome everything she had thrown at him, finally relented and allowed him to marry her daughter Hebe, goddess of youth. Heracles became immortal in the end, but his story is not one of triumph, it's one of tragedy, of strength that couldn't save him from madness, of atonement that could never bring back the family he killed, of a hero so powerful that his very existence brought suffering. Take a breath now. Feel the weight of that story, the complexity, the way strength alone is never enough, the way even heroes suffer, especially heroes, because they bear burdens ordinary mortals cannot imagine. Your body is so relaxed now, so still, and the stories continue, softer, carrying you toward deeper sleep as we meet more heroes, more impossible journeys.